Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Lee Warwick. This is Tech Junior Tutorials, and we're doing Advent of Code 2019, and this is day 2. So let's jump to it. So this is day 2. Um, just like day 1, the large part of the challenge of this is understanding this crazy set of instructions that they give you. Um, so before we jump into that, just real quick, I'm going to put all of this code into a repository and link it on the video. So I should be able to see that in the description below. So you can check out this code in case like following along at home and maybe don't have a good connection and the code on your screen isn't high resolution. So anyway, back to it. They were talking about 1202 program alarm. And I had to read this about 800 times today. But basically, you're working with something called an int code. And basically, so here's the input for this. So you're going to work with this array, right? And you're going to parse this array in groups of 4. And so the first group here we'll look at. So the first position is going to tell you what you're going to do with the next 3 inputs. So 1 means you're going to add, 2 means you're going to multiply, and 99 means end the program. After that, the next 3 things are not the values themselves, they are the location of the values, which is another thing that threw me off. So this would be the position of the first input, the position of the second input, and then the position where you're going to write the answer. So if 1 is add, we're going to add position 0 with position 0 and write it to position 3. So position 0 is 1. Position 3 is this 3, which is a great place to start because you're already kind of getting confused. So we would add 1 plus 1 and then overwrite this third, or this, third index with 2. And then we would jump, after we were done with that operation, we would jump up to this number 1 and we would do another addition, this time looking at position 1, position 2, writing again to position 3, so on and so forth. So they give you a couple examples of this down here. So like here's this entire, a shorter version of what we saw before. So here you would look at index 9, index 10, and add them together, which I think would be 30 and 40, and then write it to position 3, which would be where that 3 is. So the 3 would become 70, which you can see down here. So that honestly wasn't too bad. But then you get to part 2, which was a real doozy. So they go through explaining more about this int code program, talking about memory addresses and the instructions. I almost forgot. They added in the very last part of the instructions here on part 1. Position 1, they want you to change right off the bat to 12, and 2 needs to be changed to 2. So that means that this becomes 12, that becomes 2 at the start of this challenge. So you get the input, change those 2 values, and then figure out what kind of function you can write to produce the output that they're looking for, which in this case was this 3 million value. So then in part 2, back to that, it's building off of part 1 again, like day 1, except now they're trying to make you figure out like what is the noun and verb. So basically, like they had you change positions 1 and 2 in the part 1, they're through the whole explanation saying like this is a noun, we're going to call position 1 a noun, position 2 a verb, and then you're going to have to find out what 2 values fit into there to run the same program to give you the new output, which is this what, 19,690,000. So this like totally melted my brain. I thought that they were talking about what entire program would you have to make, like what int code array would you have to make yourself in order to do this thing, and then this threw me off forever. this 100 times noun plus verb. I was like, oh my gosh, what is that? And basically, that instead of saying, hey, write the noun and the verb next to each other with a zero spacing or something like that, um, they want you to take the noun, whatever you get, and multiply it by 100. So that would give you 1200, and then just add the verb to it, which, if the verb is to, would give you the 02. So that's the output that they were looking for, which in this case was 8298. So that being said, if you're watching this at home and you're like, man, Lee's blazing through this thing, no big deal. Believe me, I spent a lot of time pounding my head on my desk today before I actually understood this set of instructions, and had to ask some other people doing the advent of code, like, hey, what the heck are they looking for? Before I got a clue, like, oh, you're supposed to use the original input dummy. So don't feel bad about that. All right, so let's check this out in Python. So I'm going to open up my VS Code instance here. I've got the input copied over from the website into a .txt file, and we're going to be working in gravity assist .py. So for this one, you could probably do this with a for loop, and I really don't like doing that because I feel like it's really hard to read and makes the code kind of messy. So I did it with a functional approach and kind of like built functions that call other functions and that sort of thing. But the first thing that we want to do with this is we want to get this input and actually print it to the screen. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab this input.txt file. So we can use with open, and that will expect a path to the file. And so it's going to be input.txt. Yesterday we did this R thing, and I said I don't know what that is. Thankfully, there were some cool people on Twitter that pointed me in the right direction on that. I read some documentation and that sort of thing. So basically, what's happening here is you could do this in a different way. You could do file is equal to open input.txt. But what this with as syntax is actually doing is it is calling the like enter, what was it called? Like on JavaScript, you would say it's a prototype, but it's like a method that's attached to the open object in Python. So it's basically opening and closing the file for you without you having to worry about it. So when you call with as, like when you're in this block, the file is open. When you exit it, it closes the file. Otherwise, you would have to do like file.close whenever you were done after the open. So either way should work. I use the with as syntax. So also, instead of doing handler, we'll just call this like underscore file. So the underscore is saying like, hey, don't use this elsewhere in the code. We're just using this for our open method right here. So we are going to declare, well, first of all, let's just print this and see what we get. So we'll print a file.read, whoop, and we should get some output. So I can learn to type Python, gravity assist.py, and there's our output, which is great. So off to a good start. After this, we want to take these values, instead of having a string of values, we want to have a list of values. So we can do that pretty easily in Python by using the split command. So we're going to tack split onto that, and we're going to split it by a comma. So if we do that, now we've got all of these lovely strings. So now we need to take all of the values in this, and because we're going to be working with numbers, we probably want to turn these into integers instead of strings, which tripped me up when I was doing the solution. So to do that, we are going to, you could probably make like a new array and loop through this with like a for loop or something, or a for thing in array and change it. but I went ahead and used the list. So what I ended up doing was saying that my inputs were equal to a map. So a map in JavaScript basically is like a factory that goes through and changes everything in your array. In Python, it does the same thing. So you run through this list, it creates a new, it does actually create a list, it creates an iterable, which is slightly different. I haven't read totally into that in Python yet, but creates a new thing to loop over um, that we can then use. So a really good usage for this would be we would use an arrow function in JavaScript. Here we're going to use a lambda. So we use the keyword lambda. We'll say like x is our number or whatever input. Or we could call it like str for string. We're going to say cast this to an integer. And the thing that we are looping over would be this file input. So we'll do like string inputs is equal to that. And then we're going to pass in string inputs. And now, save that. We should be able to print our inputs, and they should be numbers now, with any luck. So we have a map object. So let's try and cast this to a list. So we'll use the list constructor here. There we go. So now we have a list of numbers instead of a list of strings that are numbers. You probably could do a for loop or something. So now that you've got your numbers in your list, you can actually, this kind of surprised me. I thought that this was a function that we were within with this with as block. And so I was like, oh man, I'm trapped in here now. I have to work within this block, but you can actually pull out of this block here and we should get the same output. So these are like when you're declaring a variable within the with as, it's in the global scope, which I didn't realize. But now we've got our list of numbers, and now we can actually do the problem. So remember, for our list of numbers, we want to do like an operation with the first group of 4, and then work with the values at these indices, and then modify this thing, this list. So I think that's a great use of a function. We'll call this int code because that's what the original problem called it. And we're going to pass this our program, which is that list, and we're going to give it an index to start at. And I'm going to start at a default of 0. You could use a for loop to do this, and like do increments of 4 as you loop through. But I think that's kind of messy, so I would rather do it like functionally. So we're going to do our opcode is equal to program and then the index. And so this is really, really close to JavaScript. The only thing different is you would put like const or var or something. So a lot of this code is very similar to something you might be used to working with. We're going to say if the opcode is equal 99, go ahead and return position 0 because that is the end of the program. So moving past that, we'll grab like the first number index. Let's do that. Keep camel casing. We're going to do program. So the next value, so that'd be 0, be number 1 index, number 2 index. Be at position 2. And then our answer index is going to be at position 3. So that is our group there. So now we need to figure out which operation we're doing. Are we doing addition or multiplication? And then add or multiply the numbers together. So there might be a fancier way to do this, but I didn't have time to look it up. Just use another if. So if opcode equal to 1, we're going to do the answer index is going to be equal to the number 1 index, I'm sorry, program number 1 index. So this will trip me up a whole bunch of times, but you don't want to actually add the values here together. You want to take those values, do a lookup in your list, and add that number together. So add number 1 and number 2 together, and then we want to jump to the next set of numbers. So we need to make sure that we increase our index by 4. Then we're going to return this function again. So when we do this operation, we are working with the first group because we start at index 0 by default up here. But then the next time around, we're going to change that index to the next position up, which would be 4, and it's going to run again on that set of numbers. And it'll just keep running until it hits 99. So we're going to call this function from within itself, and we're going to pass in program and index. And then for opcode 2, be very similar, except this is going to be a multiplication. And that should be it for the part 1 of the solution. So let's go ahead and come down here and just call this. Just going to print encode inputs. And if we run that, it's like we got something crazy. We got 3. So we wrote the wrong answer index. So there's one more thing that we have to do before we go ahead and print this out, and that is change position 1 to 12 and position 2 to 2. And that gives us our 3,562,624, which if we jump back to admin of code, for part 1 is the answer we're looking for. Now for part 2, we're going to have to refactor a little bit, because for part 2, they want to basically be able to change these two numbers and find a specific input. So instead of doing this manually and doing like crazy for loops or whatever, I think it's easier to write another function that's going to call this function. So to do that, we're going to define set int code. It's going to take our program, position 1, position 2, and we don't want to change this inputs array and modify it. We want to make a copy of it so that we can pass through this over and over again as we get our solution. So to do that, we're going to make a program copy, which is equal to program.copy. So if we pass a list in, list has a method copy, which will just make a new copy of the list, which is super convenient. Pretty awesome Python. So change this to program copy. And instead of hard coding that, Position 1, position 2. We're going to make this return int code program. Copy. I'll remember one day. Okay, so now we can do set int code. And yeah, we're going to do inputs 12, 2, just to make sure that this works. And we get the same number, which is great. So now we can do that loop that we want to do. So in the instructions, it says that you have to go between 0 and 99 for possible values that could be passed in, or position 1 and position 2. So the easiest way to do that is to do a nested for loop. So to do that in Python is pretty dang easy. We do for I in a range, and we're going to get a range of 100 because it does not include value 100. This would be like for, in JavaScript, for let I equals 0, I less than whatever. We don't have to do all that. Like, we're pretty much already done in Python, just writing that for I in range. And then to do a nested for loop, and just do it again. J in range 100, which should, I think, print, is that 10,000 times? So 10,000 possible values that we could pass into this thing. And then we're going to test set int code with inputs. And we're going to pass it I and J. We're going to say, we're going to have to get that value. If the value equals this, go ahead and print I and J. So this is a really great spot to use in fstring because we want to do that weird thing where they multiply by 100 and add the other number. We're not going to do that. We're just going to, well, I think I got lucky actually now that I think about it because I had 8298. If I had just printed these like with an f string, I would have missed that spot if there was a 0 there. So let's go ahead and do this programmatically and print 100 times I plus J. Let's see what we get. All right, there we go. So 8298, which is the value that we were looking for. And if you're curious about what I was talking about with an f string, what I had done was this, which lets you do like templating in Python. So I put I, put J, and then I got lucky because there's no 0 there. If this was like 2, like in the example, I would have got 82.2 instead of 82.02. So definitely this is the better version of what I did. But I got to refresh on fstring, so I guess that's a bonus. Cool, so thanks for joining me for the Python solution. Check back tomorrow for day 3. I will post a link to the repo with this solution in it, and you can check that out, compare it with what you did, and yeah, leave a comment and let me know how you're doing on Advent of Code. All right, see you tomorrow. Bye.